Hey guys, welcome to today's video where I want to show you 7 more modifications for your LEXUS GX470. This video basically builds on the last 7 modifications video that I made, which has my current setup. This video is more about my future build plans, so come along with me as I try to discover the best way to set up a GX470. Alright guys, let's get right into the video. First, we have some sort of rear-mounted tire carrier. When you have upgraded to oversized tires, you're not likely to be able to fit them in the factory spare tire location underneath the cargo area in the rear. Even if you are able to air down your spare and squish it in there like many people do, it's not ideal because you don't know if you will be able to access that spare in the event that you get stuck while needing a spare tire change, which is often the case. The rear end of your vehicle could be inaccessible due to mud, rocks, sand, or snow getting in the way. To access your spare tire in this scenario, you would need to jack up the rear of your vehicle enough to drop the spare down, release it from the cable, and slide it out from underneath the car. Not only difficult, but possibly extremely dangerous if the jack is on unstable ground. This is why it is generally recommended to run the spare on the back of the vehicle, so it is readily accessible. Now there are many forms of rear tire carrier, and I'll go through some of the advantages and disadvantages for each of these options. First, the most advanced setup is a full metal rear bumper and single or dual swing out. There are several advantages to this option, including the armor protection that it provides to the rear of the vehicle, the ability to integrate a hitch, the close fitment of the spare tire and other accessories like jerry can holders to the rear of the vehicle. The key disadvantages of this setup are, of course, the high cost and weight. These rear bumper / swing out setups can be hundreds of pounds without any spare wheel and tire and fuel. When you add those elements, that's at least another 75 to 100 pounds minimum. If you go this route, you will need to ensure that your suspension is designed to be able to support this amount of weight. Next, for tire carriers, is the JW off-road style tailgate mounted tire carrier. This design features a bracket that mounts to your GX's tailgate with a lower support tongue that carries most of the tire's weight. For advantages, I think this solution looks really great, and it allows for maximum departure angle and clearance, with the added benefit of not needing to undo a latch in order to open the tailgate and access the rear of your vehicle like you do on many swing out setups. It's also probably going to be the lightest option. For disadvantages, it is limited in its functionality. There is no swing out that allows for mounting camp tables, high lift jacks, and other accessories. It's just there for the spare tire. You will also need to permanently modify your vehicle's tailgate by drilling holes through it, which may not be right for everyone. Next up is this style of swing out, which requires cutting into the factory rear bumper to fit. It isn't a full metal bumper swing out like the first style we talked about, so it really isn't considered armor, but it allows a spare tire to be mounted nice and high and tight to the rear tailgate. If you go with a dual swing out option, you have room to mount jerry cans and other accessories. Advantages for this one include lighter weight than a full metal bumper setup, while still being able to use the factory-rated hitch receiver, reduced cost versus a similar full metal bumper swing out, and the modularity and strength that comes from having a swing out carrier that mounts in 2 places. It also shares the ability to create maximum departure angle like that of the JW off-road style tire carrier. The only disadvantage I can really think of is the fact that you have to cut into the rear bumper cover. Otherwise, I think this is a great option. Finally, we have the hitch-mounted tire carrier. This is a more generic option that doesn't need to be GX specific, so that Lexus Toyota tax can be avoided, everyone. It works by using the hitch receiver that's already presumably on the rig to mount up a swing out of some kind. Most of them open laterally like mine, but there are other designs as well. The advantage of going this route is obviously modularity, especially if you use your tow hitch for other things such as bike or motorcycle carriers. When you use the hitch, you can ditch the swing out and throw the spare on the roof rack. then put everything back when you're done using that hitch-related function. Disadvantages for this setup include a pretty severe departure angle penalty. This is probably the main one, but there are other ones like the fact that the spare sits pretty far away from the rear of the vehicle, so it puts more leverage on the rear suspension and doesn't have that high and tight look of some of the other options. This gap does enable room to mount accessories like jerry cans and fold down camp tables, however, so don't take every disadvantage as an absolute. Next, I have a steel front bumper and winch setup. This can take many forms, and there are several great companies who support the GX platform. There are hybrid front bumpers that are more made up of exposed tube, and there are metal bumpers that have full sheet metal cladding like mine from DeMello Off-Road. Hybrid bumpers are great because they usually cost less and they also save a little bit of weight too. The sheet metal ones look better in my opinion as they provide a more complete look, and they also provide more coverage of the front end. Having a metal front bumper also has obvious armor benefits, and also are usually designed to improve approach angle when compared to the factory front bumper. They also enable you to fit bigger tires, but we'll talk about that later. In addition, they're a great platform for accessories. I have all my forward lighting up there, such as light pods and light bars, in pre-positioned mounting tabs that came with the bumper. The other key advantage of a metal front bumper is that it is a platform to mount a winch. Self-recovery is an important benefit if you ever do any solo off-roading, or if you want to try pushing your rig up some harder trails that you may not be able to get through with traction alone. It also enables you to be a good Samaritan and help out folks who get stuck in tight spots where using a kinetic recovery rope isn't possible. The only disadvantage that I can think of is the extra weight and maybe a slight reduction in aerodynamic smoothness, but that's not really worth quibbling over in my opinion. Next, I have one of the best bang for buck modifications as mentioned in my previous video. Bigger tires. Except this time, instead of upgrading from the stock tire size to a 32 or 33 inch off-road tire, you'd be upgrading to a 35 to 37 inch tire. To fit this tire size, almost all Toyotas require what's called a body mount chop, or BMC, which basically cuts back the metal on the part of the frame that connects the body to the frame, since it will rub on bigger tires when turning and when the suspension is under compression. Once this piece is cut back, and there's enough room in the front of the wheel well from either cutting the stock bumper up or switching to a metal front bumper like I talked about earlier, you could fit larger tires. I think 35s look great on these rigs, and the increased capability and clearance that comes with large diameter aired down tires is clear. Next is rear long travel suspension. In the previous video, I talked about how it's important that you choose suspension that fits future you, in terms of supporting the weight of the vehicle that currently is on your rig and that will be added to your rig in the future. Now, for your next stage build, I not only want to focus on supporting the weight of the rig, but increasing the length of wheel travel that it has. Now, there are front long travel setups, but they cost upward of 10 grand with installation and they're complex. On the other hand, a rear long travel setup is far less costly and complex and allows for massive amounts of flex off-road. Companies like Metaltech and Dobinson's have full bolt-in kits, including upper and lower rear links, which you can bolt on yourself. This means that a custom build is not necessary and it saves time and money. In addition to the long travel rear setup, I'm adding a panhard bar correction kit. This goes for whether you have rear long travel or just a normal suspension lift. When you lift the rear end of your GX, the panhard bar, which keeps the axle centered, becomes inclined. This panhard bar is supposed to be flat, so when it's on an inclined angle, the axle is less controlled and is off-center slightly. To improve ride quality and rear suspension smoothness, the panhard bar needs to return to that factory flat angle, and that's where the panhard bar correction kit comes in. It compensates for the lift and puts the panhard bar back to that factory designed flat angle. Next up is an onboard air setup. Having a compressor that needs to be taken out of the back, hooked up to the battery whenever you need to air up is great, but very inconvenient. An onboard air setup integrates that process into the flick of a switch. All you have to do is hook up the air hose to each of the tires, hit the switch, and the compressor fills them. You can also use this setup to power pneumatic power tools and to have an air blowgun for getting dust out of your air filter and other places. There's also another key reason to get an onboard air setup that I'll talk about in the next section. Next up is re-gearing, where you replace the gears in your front and rear differentials. When you put large diameter tires and significantly more weight on your rig, it puts your drivetrain at a severe gearing disadvantage, like trying to pedal uphill in high gear on your multi-speed bicycle with sandbags around your shoulders. Low range is most effective when gearing is short and allows you to crawl up obstacles using very little engine power while giving you more control by enabling you to use more of the rev range. You lose this advantage when you install large diameter tires, but you can regain this advantage by installing shorter gears. You also get your factory drivability back to some extent for when you're driving on road and in high range. If you have large diameter tires with no re-gear, you'll notice how sluggish it feels around town. Your GX470 has a 3.73 to 1 final drive gear ratio from the factory. Upgrading means this gear ratio will be higher, i.e. there will be more rotation of the drive shafts per rotation of the ring gears and the differentials, and the axles and tires by extension. So instead of 3.73 rotations of the drive shaft per full rotation of the tires, you want to upgrade to something like a 410, 456, 488, or 529 to 1 gear ratio. When considering this decision, most people try to get back to what the factory gear ratio was while keeping the bigger tires. My advice is to factor in all that extra weight that comes with off-roading accessories as well. So if with your tire size, a 410 gear would get you back to the factory ratio, I jump to the 456. In addition, if you want to leave headroom to try out even larger diameter tires in the future, such as jumping from 35s to 37s, consider the 488. This is just for an example and shouldn't be taken as the actual calculation. I recommend finding a good gearing calculator online and start by finding the ratio that gets you back to your factory gearing with the chosen tire size. Then factor in current and even future weight plans in addition to current and future tire diameter plans like I mentioned before. It's far easier to adjust your tire size or vehicle weight than to change gearing, so you want to get this right the first time. You also don't want to overshoot and go way short on your gearing either. Unless you plan on solely rock crawling with your rig, having super high RPMs while on the highway could get old after a while and kill any semblance of fuel efficiency. In my opinion, going as short as 529 in a GX is only for the most extreme builds with 37 to 39 plus inch tires. For me, with my weight and tire size goals, I think 488 is right. I'll probably run the short gearing with 35s at first, and if I don't like how it drives with that short of gearing, I can always go up a tire size to make it work. Next up in my list of modifications is lockers. In my opinion, if you re-gear your truck, it's a no-brainer to add lockers or locking differential functionality to the equation as a kind of while you're in there sort of addition. Lockers add the most off-road capability of any modification other than upgraded off-road tires and can help you maintain smooth throttle input while climbing on the trails regardless of whether you lift tires off the ground because of ruts, rocks, or other obstacles. If you watched my GX470 off-road beginner's guide, you know that when all the off-road aids are turned off, the GX is an all-wheel drive vehicle that allows the car to turn easily when on a full traction surface like a road. When you're making a tight turn in a parking lot, for example, all wheels receive power from the engine, but the front wheels are completing more rotations than the rear wheels because the open differentials allow for that free movement. If you didn't allow the front wheels to freely turn more rotations than the rear wheels in this scenario, you would hear intense chirping from the tires and bind up the drivetrain and possibly destroy something. Open differentials are great for on-road driving because it means that unless a wheel loses traction, all four wheels can have drive. making it all-wheel drive. For driving in adverse conditions where a wheel may lose traction or a tire may lose traction, Lexus gave us a Torsen limited slip center differential, which when, say, you're on a hill and you lose traction to one of the front wheels on an ice patch, it actually is able to send a limited amount of engine torque to the rear wheels to try to recover some of that traction and keep you going up the hill. When you're off-road, you don't have to worry about binding up the drivetrain as much because dirt is a loose surface, unlike paved roads. You're also presumably often losing traction at the front or the rear of the vehicle when off-roading. So the GX470 comes equipped with a center locking differential from the factory, which means that power from the engine gets distributed to the front and rear axles in a 50-50 locked split that is not variable like it is when in the normal limited slip mode. It is basically like switching the vehicle to four-wheel drive from all-wheel drive. This is great for controlling traction from front to rear, but keep in mind that the GX has to let the left and right wheels spin independently from each other on road as well. For this job, the GX does not have fancy limited slip differentials in the front and rear axles, but open differentials, meaning if you lift a wheel while you're wheeling off-road, power will flow to the path of least resistance and just spin the wheel that's in the air or spin the wheel that's on the ice patch when on-road. Now, to combat this, from the factory, Lexus employed the braking system so that when a wheel gets lifted off-road, it pulsates the brake on the low traction side to sort of trick the power into flowing to the wheel on the other side, which has all the traction. This system is called A-Track, and it works great for mild off-roading and is a contributing factor to why the GX is so capable out of the box. However, A-Track only engages after slippage is detected, meaning that you have to lose a lot of your forward momentum before it kicks in. This can be dangerous if you're on a steep hill climb with deep ruts, and it means you need to get a bit of a running start in order to make it through, since A-Track gets disabled when the revs get too high. When you get differential lockers installed on your front and rear differentials, in addition to the factory installed center differential locker, you completely bypass the need for A-Track, since the lockers essentially tied the left and right side wheels together on the front and rear axle. Since the front and rear wheels are essentially tied together with the center differential locker, it means that all four wheels spin at the exact same rate no matter what. If, for example, your front left and right rear wheels slip into ruts at the same time while off-roading, which some call crossing axles, a center differential locker won't help you, as the problem isn't with front to rear traction, it's with left to right traction. When you install lockers in the front and rear axle differentials, you're now able to overcome that problem with left to right traction and enable the tires that still have grip, the front right and the rear left in this example, to claw you out of those ruts. Of course, you can't have all four wheels locked together like this when driving on pavement or even when trying to take tight turns on dirt, so this function needs to be switchable. Air-actuated lockers or air lockers allow for this. These lockers are engaged when you hit a switch that controls the onboard air compressor we talked about earlier. The compressor turns on and pressurizes air lines that are routed to the lockers during the installation process. When the air lockers are engaged, the differentials in the front and rear now lock the left and right axles together, not allowing any variation in left to right wheel rotation. Bottom line, when you get into an extremely difficult section off-road, flick on the lockers, dominate it, and then when you're back to the easy part of the trail where you need to make tight turns and stuff, flick the lockers off, and that's that. Finally, I'm gonna go with an aftermarket head unit of some kind. I personally have the Joying 9-inch Android unit. Not only does having an aftermarket head unit bring your GX into line with most newer vehicles in terms of infotainment capability, with available Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, it's also the perfect platform to host a trail camera or multiple trail cameras. The further your GX is lifted and the bigger the tires, the more out of touch you become with the ground. And it makes it difficult when the nose of your rig is pointed up a hill and all you can see is sky, and you're wondering where that big rock you saw when approaching the hill is located. Putting a trail cam on the front of your rig and pointing it so that it covers the lower front portion of the vehicle provides you with the needed visibility to navigate through tough scenarios like this one, and can give you some confidence when trying to wheel without a spotter. Of course, you should always have a spotter when attempting insanely gnarly stuff, but when you're alone, having a camera feed to glance at in your infotainment display, instead of having to get out of the vehicle all the time to check things out, is a great thing. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you have any additional modifications you would recommend, go ahead and leave them in the comments for everybody down below. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, the notification bell. It really helps me out, and it motivates me to keep making videos for you guys. We'll see you in the next one.